Okay, it looks like we're live. I think even though it shows like a progress bar on the YouTube side of things, that we actually start the minute it says we're live on YouTube in the corner of this little screen here. So welcome to Dive into World Building. We meet again. Gosh, this whole transfer from one technology to the other has been kind of an adventure for me, but I feel like we're starting to get a little bit of rhythm going. So I'm really happy that you guys are here. And I have a feeling that we'll have a couple more people pop in before the end of the session. So awesome. Today we're talking about blind spots in white rooms. And I know the phrase blind spots is a little odd, but I wanted to make sure that I had captured not just white rooms where you have people interacting in a space where nobody can see, there's no sense of the environment, but also the kinds of things that people don't necessarily think about including when they're writing a story and when they're world building. So the things you don't see is kind of the theme of today. I do sometimes underdo setting when I write. And it's partly because I don't like info dumping. And it's partly because I always want to make sure any description of the setting is actually filtered through the viewpoint and judgment of the character experiencing that setting. And so until I have that figured out, sometimes I just won't write it in. I have this idea that this story that I was telling you about a minute ago is going to have one type of scene where it's just dialogue between two people and you can't see anything around them. So that's a technique, right? The bare dialogue.
Speaking in a white void, yeah.
Yeah, the void, the white room, we don't know anything about what's around them. And that's more like a sort of glean from what they're talking about, what their surroundings are, but you do have to be careful. You do have to be careful because anytime that you don't specify something, there will be a default that gets filled in, right? So in a way, this is a default related topic as well. Not everybody's default is the same, but these defaults come from our cultural expectations and from our experience with these media and with books and with everything else. So it's like when I have to make sure it's like when I make sure that I mention electricity in the first page of any story that has Varan involved, because I have to block off the default expectation that just because you're seeing ladies in gowns and nobles and this, that, and the other, that this is a low technology society, right?
Right.
So, hi, LaShawn.
Hello, hello.
Welcome, welcome. So we were just talking about basically how to orient to the topic, which is the things that you don't see and things that you are likely to fill in with defaults if you're not being careful.
I do want to bring up right now that, yes, defaults are culturally dependent, what you see as a default. But sometimes it's just something as simple as regional culture. Like if you grew up in the Midwest and someone tells you their house does not have a basement because they live somewhere who needs a basement, the expectation they have is, of course you have a basement, of course you have air conditioning, of course you have central heat, because that's their default. And that is, the culture can be regional, not just
absolutely
racial.
Absolutely, yeah. And there are a lot of these defaults. Like, I mean, basements and cellars are really not very common in California.
Yeah,
Right.
for good reason. Yeah.
Well, you know, and it would be shocking, for example, if your house were not bolted to its foundation in California. Right? Because you can't count on just gravity holding it there. I was actually in the 89 earthquake. I was right next door to a house that literally walked off its foundation because
Oh
it
my
had been
goodness.
built before that was the rule.
Huh.
Wow.
I didn't even think about that till now. And I lived in California for most of the year. I didn't think about bolting foundations.
Right?
I grew up in New York. I grew up in New York City. Basements, yes. Bolting foundations, no.
Yeah. So, you know, when you're building, it's good. It's fun to assume that this is the way it's going to stay, and that, you know, you don't have to kind of tie it down at every point. But these big earthquakes that have come through California have changed building codes for these very, very specific reasons, right? And this is why if you see brick, you can pretty much count on the fact that it's heavily reinforced with rebar and various things. And it's actually quite rare because, you know, once you have to do all that extra reinforcement, it gets a lot more expensive to use brick as a building material.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of little stuff like that you can kind of discover, I guess. And rooms have idiosyncrasies. And depending on who, I mean, the question of who decorated them and why is actually really potentially quite important. And so,
and how?
yeah, just sticking some people in a room is, you know, okay, do that, but then later take the time, go back. What is the room for? Right?
What does the decoration say about the person? Like,
Who decorated it? What do the
see
decorations say? Exactly.
You can see maps behind me. So yeah, what does that say about me?
And a sword.
And a sword, and my sword. Yes.
Paul has maps and a sword. What do I have? I have wall hangings and curtains and an unmade bed.
Which mostly I can't see, but I can see the pictures.
I block it with my body.
Yeah, you do. And a dresser.
Uh-huh.
But it looks as though you deliberately decorated your room.
Yes.
And that is another thing. Was this room deliberately decorated? Was it, you know, did somebody say, I have an empty room, I'm going to make it look like this? Or did they say, okay, here's a room and I have to put these things that go in this room, and I'm just going to put them there and go off and do other things because I don't have time to think about this and it's not high on my list of things to think about.
I have actually, I have a story that has a room full of books in it. And when I wasn't really thinking about how the books got there, I had them on shelves. And then when I went back and I was like, wait, let's think about how these books got here, I realized some of them are on shelves, but then they got in a hurry. And so there are whole regions of this space that are just piles and piles of like cases of books that haven't been unpacked. And there's a lot of chaos in this space.
There's too much between this and the stack that would illustrate your description.
So as far as deliberately decorated, right? The organization of the books is like, yes, we intended to have an organization, but we didn't really get to carry it out in the way that we wanted. And and when you walk into that room full of books, you don't know anything about the circumstances of how it arrived there.
Yeah.
And that's a way for you to express to your reader without having to explain that something's going on here, because it's not like walking into the local public library or the Beauty and the Beast carefully curated collection of books. Right? Yep.
You can describe a room through because a lot of people will just not look at the room they're in if they're there all the time, unless someone else brings something to their attention.
Yes.
Wow, looks like you had a burglary in here, and you're going, no, that's just my housekeeping. But you
We
won't
haven't
think about it.
analyzed your room. You have an exercise machine and a gaming chair. Interesting contrast.
Yeah, and one of them has dust on it, and one of them does not. But there was I have a story, or part of a story, where there's one of the protagonists doesn't think about her kitchen, doesn't really use it for cooking. She has a microwave, she can order online, whatever. And then she gets a boyfriend who loves to cook. And so suddenly she's looking at this kitchen and thinking, what does he see when he walks into this place? And so I can describe it that way, because otherwise, we'd never see it, because she doesn't think about it.
Right, that's the point of view thing, taking a different point of view, and you can use that. Yeah, you can use through his eyes, or what she thinks his eyes will see, and crack it.
Yeah, but until then, it's nondescript. But you might be able to look at the discussions that she has, or the things that she thinks about dating a guy who can cook. And from that, extrapolate to, if she's so excited by a guy who can cook, what does her kitchen look like? Well, it's probably not used all that much. Well, for the reason that she's excited, because
it reminds me of that episode of Queer Eye where Anthony walked into this woman's kitchen. It's like, so your range is really clean. I'm gonna say that. I'm gonna guess that means something. Look, your microwave has got a lot more wear.
Yeah.
So yeah. What has wear? I think you brought up something important, Morgan, is this idea that it's not necessarily even the writer's blind spots always that we need to think about, but we should also think about what the character's blind spots are.
Right.
Character judgment is a huge thing for me, so I'm always interested in talking about, like, why do people pay attention to the things they pay attention to, and how does that change depending on circumstance?
Yeah, it's a really subtle trick to make sure that the reader can see that it's the character's blind spot, not the writer missing out. It's like, no, the character's deliberately not seeing this. And you can do that with switching point of view, or bringing in a new perspective like that to show, like, oh yeah, the character has no clue. The writer clearly was keeping things on the down low till this happened.
Yes.
Okay, I'm done eating.
Welcome.
You were really well.
So
I'm writing my notes over here.
But yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, it's actually fun to play with characters' blind spots, because you can use it to, like, like keep them in the dark with something that's needed, and then they could be like absolutely surprised when the thing does happen. So
Yeah, and you can triangulate that stuff with other points of view,
yeah.
or you can just be really, really careful in how you handle it. Like putting an important object in an array of other objects that the character sees, but not having the character differentiate between them particularly, right?
Yeah.
That's one thing. I know that's a technique that J.K. Rowling uses quite a bit. Just filling a room with stuff. Some of it's important.
Hide it in plain sight.
Right? Exactly.
I think a discovery writer can use that themselves as like, okay, I have this room here, and then something later on pokes up at them as being important to the narrative, and they could just like pull it in. So that's kind of like the spaghetti at the wall approach.
Yeah, sure. Just kind of populate the room with whatever you can think of, and then something might be useful later, right?
Mhm.
There are several ways to approach it.
Yeah. Hotel rooms. How many people really look at their hotel rooms after the first minute when they look around and say, is this basically what I expected?
Mm-hmm.
And they won't notice anything unless something's wrong.
Or if it's really
nice.
Yeah, or it's really culturally different. Like hotel rooms in outside of the United States are usually smaller, and that always throws me. It's like, this is unusual, or the
Yeah.
unusual layout, or fixtures. That
Mhm.
definitely tweaks my. I mean, after a couple of days, I'm used to it, but there's that initial getting used to it period where it's all fresh, new, and different.
Well, it all depends though on what kind of hotel. Like you have your contemporary hotels that are standard, basic, bed, bathroom, stuff like that. But sometimes you can have a hotel in like an older building.
Mm-hmm.
So last year I was at a conference, and we were actually put into a men's club, which was interesting. Because we weren't, basically this conference had sold out a whole bunch of hotels. So they were basically putting people everywhere they could. And
Yeah,
it just
okay.
so happens there was this old style men's club that had rooms. So and I remember going into our room, and there was just so many things that were so unique and interesting and bizarre that I was like, holy cow, this is weird. For instance, all the doors were like 8 feet high, and all the fixtures were really high up.
Oh,
And I'm like, I'm 5 foot even. So it's like, I remember there was like this one light that's like, if I could stretch my arm, I can reach it. And it was like, that is ridiculous. Why is it so high? And and then my husband comes in, and oh yeah, he's 6 foot even. He's like, he reaches out, it's like a men's club. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it
yeah.
reminds me of this video that we were sent when my husband and I were about to move to Japan. We were about to take an apartment, and we had to choose our apartment based on videos that had been taken of the apartment. And the videos were great. And we chose the apartment, and we got there and we were like, this place is so short. And the thing was, the video had been taken by a smaller person than us. Right. And so there was really no problem with the apartment, but just that slight change in angle really changes the way you perceive the entire space.
Yeah.
Yeah. And part of this is going to be expectation. If you're staying at something that's called a hotel, you're going to have a different expectation, even within your experience and within a culture, than if you're staying at some place called a motel or a bed and breakfast
or a ryokan
or a men's club.
Yeah.
But the, other, expectations like the reminded me of a story of a fight I had with a college boyfriend, actually, about how he changed plans and did not tell me. He said, I left you a note on the door of your room. I said, no, you didn't. I'm five, not quite 5'2". I was not quite 5'2" at the time, and he was 6'1". He says, I'll show you. Let's go up to your room and I'll show you the note. And he says, I left it right. Oh, here. I'm sorry.
I left you right where you weren't going to see it.
It's at eye level.
Well,
Yeah,
here's the
you're right.
thing. So
What
that
taller
eye
than me?
level thing
Mhm.
is actually huge.
Yeah.
And I remember when I became a parent and had to be in a lot of spaces with small people.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to retrain myself to look down because I had gotten so out of the habit. When you're in like elementary school and you've got these kids of all these varying sizes, you're used to looking at various heights for people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden you're in an adult world and you kind of, it's actually a pretty narrow range, right?
Yeah.
Adult heights considering.
Well, within a culture, but like, for example, I was a month ago in Nepal, and up in the mountains. I mean, I had to keep. I mean, I'm 5'6", and I had to keep ducking my head because
Yeah.
the doors are all like 5'1". It's like, and relatively narrow because as a general rule, the population is short. So even me being relatively short for a guy, I still had to deal with that. And we kept warning, like, duck your head. It's like, oh, it's like I was and the people who are tall in my group had even more problems. It's
Yeah.
just built for a completely different culture and body plan.
No, it's true. And I'm not trying to diminish that, but I still think that the range of adult heights is not actually that broad. Or it certainly is, like we aren't looking at,
Yeah.
3 feet usually, which is where, small people would have a much tougher time because, adults who are accustomed to seeing people of a certain range of heights get out of the habit of looking through that larger range.
And the expected range is actually smaller than the actual range.
Mm-hmm.
And which is why people who are under 5 feet, adults who are under 5 feet, are treated as unusual.
Yeah.
Or
Well, I mean, we have all kinds of biases about
inconvenient.
height and how tall
Yeah.
people are supposed to be.
Yeah.
But I think that's a topic for another day.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so I am thinking at this point about the idea that we are trained not to notice certain things. There are a couple ways that we fail to see things. And I think it's worth asking the question for a world building perspective. How do people learn not to see things? There is, to some extent, there is the factor that we tend to notice new things. And once something has been in a spot for a while, our eyes tend to just sort of gloss over it because, of course, it's always been there and we don't see it anymore. I find that this is a thing with like messes. I think once in a particular location for a particular amount of time, I'm like, I don't care. I don't see it anymore. Whereas my husband doesn't really have that same. He'll be like, why is this still here?
Well, you had a break-in comments about, if you don't see it until other people comment on it. I think you are taught not to see things versus you are not taught to see things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but there are things that we are deliberately taught not to see. I'm thinking of like the city in the city, right?
Mm-hmm.
which is an example of people being taught not to see or look at particular types of things. Or particular types of people too. Or, if we don't know how to interact with a group of people, then we will tend to kind of not look that direction.
Right.
So we're not called on it.
Or like homeless people.
Right.
Yeah. But I found personally that I can get that reset if I'm in a completely different setting. Like, for example, in 2017, when I went to Australia, I mean, my senses growing up in New York, I've kind of unfortunately have a tendency to tune out homeless people. But then when I went to Melbourne, those tunes out didn't work, and I noticed them. It's just like, wow, there's a lot of homeless people there. And I feel like, no, it's just because I'm so used to tuning it out. I'm in a completely foreign environment. Now I'm actually seeing the actual population for what they are. So
well, a change of environment will change the conditions, right?
Mm-hmm. Overriding those blinders that I put on myself.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it would be interesting to kind of dig down a little bit and try to figure out what exactly it was that made the configuration different that brought your attention to it.
Different languages, different configuration of streets, different signs. It's not, I'm in an unfamiliar city, so I'm paying attention to everything,
right?
Because I'm trying to get around, so I'm paying attention to everything. And so
interesting, yeah.
Things I would blind out, I'm not, because I can't, because I need to find my way around.
Yeah, interesting. Well, that's definitely, when you take yourself outside of a familiar context, you're more likely to be attentive to more things, I think.
Even things I would tune out, yeah.
So what if your entire story is about people who are in an environment they're familiar with, and there's no one from outside to call attention to anything? Then you need something to change.
Yes. What if everybody is a native of the environment? I think honestly that you can execute triangulation on a smaller scale.
Not everybody is the same. You're going to have different people within the same context. Not everyone have the same opinions, have the same experiences. There's always going to be someone who feels like an outsider, even though they've grown up within that. Hey, Kate.
Hey. I absolutely agree with you. That was exactly what I was about to say too, is that, you're always going to find that person who doesn't feel like they fit in, and that's your person to get in through.
Yeah.
And then your job becomes making that person's perspective interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also think that people, even when we have, people don't always fit comfortably into the identities that they are expected to accept. Right?
Very much so.
So if you have people struggling with that, then it will allow you to examine what it is that they are supposed to accept and what it is that they are supposed to accomplish as a member of a particular group. And I don't honestly see that nearly enough in fiction.
Yeah.
Which is why I leaned into it pretty hard in my novel.
And there's how does someone who is struggling with expectations, who's not the point of view character is looking at someone who is surly or disruptive or anxious, and they don't know why, Is it because they are uncomfortable with their position, or is it because they are unhappy with me, or what did I do to deserve this? To say, this is not about, to have the protagonist figure out, this is not about me, this is about this person's situation. And that's a blind spot, is I think, is realizing that it's not always about you and your interaction with the environment or the other person.
And I think sometimes that's where unreliable narrators start, because you only have that person's point of view on this other person that really are in their head. And so you don't know all the things that make this interaction go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You can never know what is in the other person's head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even as an author, you still don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Frustrating.
I'm writing notes.
People have different motivations, and you might tend to assume that this person did this thing for X reason, but they didn't. It's just that you would have done that if you were to do it for X reason.
I used to think, and this is on Kate's point, I used to think that there was such a thing as an unreliable narrator. And then I realized that every narrator is unreliable.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I thought
Mhm.
about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that's it was a really big moment for me when I was like, wait, they're all wrong.
Which is probably one reason it's so tempting and useful to have multiple points of view, multiple protagonists of view.
Well, I mean, you don't necessarily want to have all kinds of points of view. That's something that we could talk about at another time.
Yeah.
It's an information management problem in many respects.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, it's always good to acknowledge where this person is reliable and where this person is unreliable.
Yeah.
And as the writer, you can do things like setting up situational irony, so that readers can understand that there's something going on, that the main character is not reliable in this way, even if they're your only source for the narrative.
Yeah, and it's also I'm struggling really hard with this because I have sort of one voice at the moment, and I need several for characters. And I just got done reading a book where now I'm realizing right this second that one of the things that I really hated about it was that every character thoughts sounded exactly the same. And I didn't, there was a whole bunch of other stuff I did not like about it, but that was definitely one of them that I kind of didn't get into the review, which I should go back and do. And man, the last several months, I'll give you a moment that has been really an educational for me as I read people self-publish stuff. Most people need an editor. Usually,
I think everybody needs an editor.
Everybody needs an
editor. Yeah.
But yeah, I've been reading a lot of stuff just going, this needs editing. And I think that's where a lot of this kind of gets stressed, is your editor or your beta reader looking at this and going, is that what you meant? Is that where you were going?
Or I can't see where they are right now.
Yeah.
Right. A second pair of eyes is not just about having multiple points of view inside the narrative. You should also have multiple points of view outside the narrative.
Right.
Yeah.
How many of you guys have done any work like with someone else writing characters?
Role-playing games?
No.
Does that count? I mean, writing role-playing game turns. I mean, sometimes we've done multiple characters with people, and sometimes traded off using the same character.
Yeah.
And their conception of what the character says and doesn't mind doesn't always hasn't always aligned. And that sometimes is negotiation. Like, well, they wouldn't say it that way.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, collaborating on a thing?
Yeah.
The same characters? Oh, yeah. I haven't.
Well, I mean, we did have. It would be interesting to go back and look at like Monica Valentinelli's visit to the show, because she was talking about working in other people's universes
Mhm.
and the kinds of requirements that are laid on an author. If they're working, for example, in the Star Wars universe,
Mhm.
like Rebecca Roanhorse just had a Star Wars book come out, which is super exciting. But I'm always like, wow, that's really cool. I don't even know how I would begin to do that.
Mhm.
um, because how do you execute the voice of Poe Dameron so that that it's going to sound like Poe Dameron?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, that's extra. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I would have to say though, in a way that's kind of easy because you have fanfic.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
true.
jump into fanfic and see how fanfic writers do write it.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like learning
Yeah.
somebody else's idiolect, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Although, and actually, so here's something that was really interesting. This actually brings back the time when Mary Robinette Kowal did something on Twitter, in that it was her and a bunch of people were doing this thing where they were trying to tweet like Patrick Rothfuss.
Mm.
Yes.
Mhm.
And whoever, and he had actually created like 5 accounts, and it's like, which is the real Patrick? And a lot of people picked this one account, and it was actually Mary Robinette Kowal.
Mhm.
And people were like, how did that happen? And she wrote a blog post saying, well, this is how I did it. I basically went back and I studied how he wrote his tweets.
Mhm.
At first she kept it like on the short end, but then she basically, like, all the interjections that he would do, she would do them too. And she fooled people pretty good. I have to bring that up because it was actually a lot of
That's pretty
fun.
awesome.
He's definitely a many splendored human.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, she
Yeah.
is.
So I don't know. I've got somebody else writing characters right now, and it's gonna get interesting. I don't know where we're gonna go with this, but yeah, we're both kind of like, we are headed down the same valley. I don't know what path we're both gonna take to get there.
I'm gonna return to something now we said a couple seconds ago, and just emphasize one more time how great it is to have outside critique, and not just critique outside yourself as an individual, but for example, outside genre critique.
Mhm.
There is a type of language used by people within genre that may not be used by people who are not familiar with science fiction, for example. And depending on who you see as your audience, you may not want to use certain kinds of special terms
Mhm.
that are very common within the science fiction community, but would be completely opaque to people outside it.
The jargon problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a language problem,
Yeah, that was another part of the thing that I was reading, is that they were trying to do aerospace jargon and doing it poorly.
Oh dear.
And I'm aerospace jargon bot. So that didn't go well.
Oh dear. Well, honestly, writing is a language activity. Right?
Fair enough.
And so it's really important to develop your skills at paying attention to language and what it's doing.
Mhm.
And that is it's one of our ultimate blind spots, actually, because just speaking from a linguistics point of view, what you find is that people have very limited control over how they express themselves in language. Most of the stuff that we do, now as we're talking to each other is completely subconscious.
Mhm.
We intend to say things, they come out a particular way, but for example, if you do a study asking people how they would request a pen from somebody else, right? You will get some very clear, answers, and you'll feel like you've got these data, and then you will take the exact same people and you will mic them and send them to get a pen, and you'll discover that they don't say what they said they would say.
Mhm.
So, they will happily tell you what they think they should say, but they won't be able to tell you what they will say.
Mhm.
And that's one of the reasons why revising is so important. But language is our tool. So paying attention to it is something that I find rewarding. It also helps me to sort of get a handle on things rather than say, this just doesn't feel right. What if I did it this way? What if I did it one of these 5 other ways? So yeah, that's why I think discourse analysis is really fun.
Yeah. Well, the same thing happens with microphones.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can do whatever I want to do, wandering around in my living room talking to my cats.
Mm-hmm.
But if you put me on stage with a microphone in my hand, my language is going to change immediately, and I'm not going to be able to tell you what it is in advance.
Yeah.
And what's really important too is when you're in the process of writing something, it's really important to have kind of a good idea of what you don't know. And if you have any question at all, Google it.
Yeah.
This last one that I ran into, and this is like number 4 to throw me out of the book, and this is the one where I actually just lost it and dropped it, was the person had a woman saying, well, I used to be a Girl Scout, and so, I'm always prepared.
Oh, no.
No! Oh my God!
No, that is we know.
No, that's the Boy Scout motto. It's not the Girl Scout motto. Very different organizations. And so that's the sort of thing, like, if I were, well, actually, I was a Boy Scout. So if I were talking about Girl Scouts, I'd have to go look it up. And I did.
What is the Girl Scout motto? Because I have no recollection. All I
I
remember
don't know. It's the
cookie.
long thing about country, and I don't even know. This is why I was a Boy Scout. We had 2 words, good. But that was the thing. It's like you have to be really, really careful about the specific information, because again, he went off on this info dump, and I love info dumps. It's like my favorite thing about Kim Stanley Robinson. God, I love those info dumps every day. But this guy goes on for a good page about the end of the KT, the KT boundary, the meteorite that hit the Yucatan and that whole thing.
Mhm.
Because he's setting up, I actually don't know why this anecdote was in the book. I have no idea how it connects, but somehow it did. And he was saying, well, the man who discovered this was Luis Alvarez. And my whole head went, what? Record scratch? And I managed to keep reading until the Girl Scout thing, and I was like, okay, now that's the last one. I have to go look stuff up. The person who discovered, or who theorized that was the event, was not Luis Alvarez, who was a great scientist in his own right. It was his son, geologist Walter Alvarez.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and you can't get those wrong. You just can't, because I can't keep reading this story.
Mm-hmm.
So got to know really well what you don't know. If I was going to go write anything about that, I would have to make sure that I had all of my P's and Q's crossed. But if you know the subject, like one of the things that I'm waiting to do is to have, I want to have a big, huge, stupid info dump about all of the fighting that botanists do.
Mm.
And they are knocked down, dragged out, bloody, punching, screaming at each other in conferences. It's really interesting. Like every other science, really. But that's one of the things I want to do. But when I go to do that, I'm going to have to sit down and write out a timeline of who did what to whom and in what hotel room, and how long did it take to get the stain out of the carpet.
And who remembers it that way and who remembers it some other way.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I was thinking spoken language and written language are very, very different.
Yep.
And there's that old thing about, read your writing aloud,
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the dialogue.
yeah.
Yeah, it saved me a lot. It's like, wait a minute, people don't talk like this. Rewrite.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And narration and dialogue are different.
Yes, very.
And even
Yeah.
naming conventions are different. If I can go back and redo some of my short stories, I would, because like some of them I was like, why did I choose this name?
Ah,
No one would name their kid Stefan, and he's from the hood.
Or to go J.K. Rowling Cho Chang.
Mhm.
mhm.
Yeah, I didn't realize for years afterwards, it's like just how benighted a name idea that is. It's like, oh, that wasn't such a good choice. It's just meaningless syllables. Nobody in Asia would name their child that.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
And there are names that you can choose for your characters that in fact people would use, but they shouldn't have. And you would have to come up with a reason that your character named their child this.
Yeah.
Involve either enormous blind spots
Mm-hmm.
or cruelty,
Uh-huh.
that kind of thing.
You know what I found that matters a lot to the spelling of a child's name? Whether the mother had an epidural and how soon they had her spell the child's name after the birth.
I did not do it.
That doesn't make sense.
Her name is misspelled because she had no idea what was going on.
I don't even remember that. I expect that any paperwork that had to be done that day was done by my husband. Who,
Yeah.
Right? Because like, how can you even?
I know.
I couldn't write my name.
Really?
For 28 hours that said you just managed to extrude a watermelon, and they want you to do.
And I did it the easy way. They had to go in and get my kid, and I still wasn't going to be able to spell anything.
We'll need the jaws of life in operating room 3.
Okay, this
they knew they were going to. This is after party stuff.
But this is how women actually talk to each other about it. And if you're ever going to write that scene,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the horror on the face of people who aren't, who haven't gone through this, and don't have any anticipation of ever going through it, and it's not part of their expectation or their daily life or that of anybody around them that is willing to.
There's something about being immediately post childbirth that makes you incredibly earthy. Right? Like, and it is almost like you have to have a coming out into society and realize, wait, I've left them behind. But it's really weird because until you're there, you can't know what it's like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is why older people tell younger people about colonoscopies.
About what?
There's existential horror on their faces. Of, oh,
About what? I missed the
Why older people tell younger people about colonoscopies.
Oh, yeah.
because you can avoid this. I did colonoscopies I'll have to have.
Your blind spots will change, and the things that you don't notice anymore because you have to think, all right, do I have anything on me? Do I have any child emissions on me that I should not be wearing into public?
Yes.
This is something you didn't think about before.
Yep. It's very much like if you have a bird and you leave the house, it's like, do I have any bird poop on my back? Well, crap, I don't know.
Well, I mean, when it comes to cat fur, I've given up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you never, like, when you get to that point, you often haven't thought about it. I used to, like, look at people in the grocery store who were wearing, you know, boots and spurs and a hat and going, well, where the hell do you think you're going, Tex? Until I was out working my horse and I came back in, tied him up to the kitchen post, and Sue's like, come on, we got to go to the store. And here I am in the grocery store, literally wearing spurs, going, I'm an idiot.
Yeah, it's the assumptions that you make. Did this person deliberately dress like this to go to the grocery store, or is it?
Yes.
And it makes a difference, you know. Some characters, who knows? Maybe some people deliberately put their spurs on so that they think they, you know, went out to that they just rushed in from.
Well, and
The
you
Old
know
West,
what?
yeah.
You just like we often have a lot of confidence in our ability to observe other people and extrapolate things about why they're the way they are, when our actual knowledge of the possible paths to get to that point are actually quite limited. It's that whole Dunning-Kruger thing. But I mean, so I think it's worth reiterating that whole point about that Kate made about know what you don't know, right? This is one of the reasons, or at least know what it is that you can't know.
Yeah.
Right? Be aware that there are things you're not going to be able to see. This is why sensitivity readers are so important, right? Hi, yeah, hi. Kate's a sensitivity reader and a really great one, so yay. Talk to her. But like,
and not just sensitivity readers, people, it applies for people who are in the know. Like, you know, I'm writing a story about dinosaurs. I don't know a thing about dinosaurs, but I have lots of friends who do. So go and talk to them, take them out to coffee. They will tell you stories that will.
Dinosaur people? Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
No bones about it.
So much.
You're gonna
Bone Wars.
color, go find your friends of color and say, okay, what's your background in this? Because I cannot tell you how many characters of color I have seen written by white people who are like, well, they grew up in the inner city and they made good and then they were a doctor and that's all you ever know about them. Woo-hoo! It's like, you know, we have actual other backstories. We have other ways we became people. Not everybody lives in the inner city. I grew up in northern Minnesota, for God's sake.
And even people who live in the city don't live in the city, or so to speak. I lived in a cul-de-sac on the edge of what was the city on the south side of Chicago. So we didn't have, like, you know, apartment buildings. We lived in houses. Granted, it was right next to train tracks, and we it was a forested area. So we played in the woods. There's woods in the city.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's totally a thing. So yeah, there's not just one way to be whoever we are. And I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of shortcuts taken because people don't want to work on that. And for some reason, now I'm thinking of Edward Said's Orientalism, and now I need to read that again. Okay.
Well, it's worth visiting. All right. Well, it's 5 o'clock. This has been so great, you guys. This is the kind of thing. This is why I do my show. Because you were all so incredibly awesome. I love this discussion. It made me also think that I definitely want to go back to that topic that I discussed when it was only Morgan and me about designing voices. I would really like to revisit that with more people involved who have, you know, a diversity of experience and languages and such. Yeah. So let's do that sometime. Not sure whether that's going to be next week, because I think we might have a guest next week, and I cannot remember who it is because my brain is on my kitchen table. But I will definitely be in touch via the Discord and via the Facebook group and various things.
And if anyone has not, I don't remember the name of the story, LaShawn, but whatever the last one you published was just amazing.
What? Which one?
Memphis Mini, was it Memphis Mini?
Yes.
Oh, the sister. Oh my gosh, the long ass. I really gotta stop writing.
Sister Loretta Tharp and Memphis Mini.
Sorry.
Oh man.
It was great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun writing it. It was a lot of fun.
Seeing his thumbs down good. That's the other half of it.
The Jazz Giants, which I don't remember who wrote that either, but yeah, kind of like that. But no, that was really, really good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Hope I can
All
do
right.
it
So
again.
what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to take us off the air, and then we can continue to chat afterwards. For people watching, you're welcome to join us in the discussion next time, and maybe be a part of the after party.